Okay, take us away. I mean, I was just going to ask why it's important, but everybody in the school kind of knows why it's important.
But I think what we should do, Eric, what might work well, is why don't we show the guys some of the new stuff in the new workbench with some of the new look on Recommender, and then show how everything gets pushed for the Showcase app, because we did do the Showcase app before, but this will just maybe be a recap on how that gets done. So maybe just for everybody's context, what we've been working on is, this kind of packaging ability to package the kind of core cases and capabilities into something that can be easily reproducible in like a client site. So the idea was that if you look out at the website, you'll now see that there's a recommender and experimentation and interaction sciences and so on. So the first phase of what we're building out is the recommend. So there's on recommend.ecosystem AI and on experiment.ecosystem AI, two separate configurations that cover everything that we talk about on a website built out end to end. What we will add over time, Jason Ramsey at some point, we'll just have to see when all of that's finished, is to publish the Adelo cases also on those sites, so that somebody can go and look at a physical experiment or look at a recommender, from that whole build out example, and they can try out different, tests and see how the results change over time. So the thing around the recommender side especially is that it's got a series of different recommenders as well as the Showcase apps now configured, so you can see how the real-time feedback works and all of that sort of thing. And we've added a lot of tooling, not a lot of tooling, but some tooling around how you can visualize it as a graph. And we also added an API tester that you can set up some pre-parameters and go and test your API directly from within the workbench, rather than having to leave and go into, some other Swagger or another tool. So you could use Postman or one of those sort of tools to look at it anyway. But just to make it a lot easier. I think that one of the next phases, and we'll see leading up to the AI Expo and other events we want to run in New York and so on in October, is to think about how this can be integrated into products like Salesforce and other technologies where clients already have licenses and they just want to integrate natively without having to go through any of the kind of configuration over time. Because the thing is that a lot of these companies talk about the prediction capabilities, but they don't have the full real-time intervention piece of it as part of the offering. So we're just trying to find a way in which we're going to segment, position it properly so that the workbench and all the steps that you have to follow to configure, let's say, a real-time recommender, and then its ability to deploy it, can be done without any coding or technical expertise. So that's, I guess, the kind of no-code vision that you guys have all heard about before. Okay, so Eric, maybe the thing will be to show like the workbench, and then to show what happens in Adelo and in Superset, if people want to show that. I mean, not Adelo, sorry, in Superset and in Grafana, and in how the real-time piece of it can be done. So Brian, it means that, or anybody who wants to demo it can essentially demo it across all those elements because they're all kind of pre-configured. So this Showcase app for Adelo, just tell me when you can see it. Can everybody see it? You see 4 images on the screen?
Yep.
So what happens with the app is that it's got 3 recommenders, and Eric will show you now how that works. So what it does, I've already logged in with a user, and it went and found 4 different images. So in this case, if you could imagine, like when you go to like a Netflix or one of those kind of, service companies, and this image would be, any one of these would be a specific theme to say that there's something about, action or drama or whatever it might be. So that could be whatever the concept is that you want to present. What you then do is, and let's say that you select, one of these, and I'm going to pick this little forestry one. It then calls the next recommender, and in this case, it uses an emotional cue to pick, what a person would select next. So this sadness, fear, love could then be like a category of a genre. So it could be for anything that you want to. So in the banking world, it could be that it's a savings and a current or investment account. In a insurance, it could be life and short and something else. So it just means that there are different categories being presented based on the previous item that you've picked. And let's say we pick, one of those emotions. It then presents a movie to you, and you can say, well, yes, I like this, and if you do like it, you accept it. And at the back end, it then updates and takes you back to, where you kind of started. So if you pick a different one, and I click this refresh, you'll see what it'll do. It'll keep on picking. Now it says surprise, love, and joy. So it picks different emotions in this example. So let's say I want something to do with surprise. And every time that you present it with something, you can come back here, the wonderful world of golf. Okay, now let's re-recommend that. Okay, the village looks like fun. So you can pick what you like, but you can keep on requesting new things, and it will then learn from your preferences as you select what you select. So this could have been Pinterest or Spotify or any one of those companies. It follows a similar kind of construct. So you can clearly see how you can build then contextual recommenders to help you find the best options for that segment or that group of people that are engaging with you. So the other thing that we've been working on, Eric probably showed now as well, is that we've been working on a lot of documentation to help people make sense of all of this. So to document how it all fits.
When you are doing that sort of demonstration, you can also use Grafana to show people what's happening with the system and it happening in real time. As Jay's interacting with this recommender, it's coming through here, so you can see what's being recommended, what he's selecting, more detail here. So there's one. This is recommending the emotions after the movies, and then you can see these one as well. So you can go through all three, so we can see these are the movies that Jay accepted. These are the ones that they rejected. This is when it happened, etc., etc. And then you can show, if you run a simulation of people using, and then you can collect a lot more data ticking by over time. But this is where people will be able to see like what has been recommended overall, what scores did it get, how fast were the responses, etc., etc. Actually, I was saying there's also just a document that walks you through it. So if you go to get started, you go through this. If you go here, it will show you all of the steps that you need to take. Well, there's a bit of preamble about what you're going to be doing to set up these recommenders and like issues it solves, and then like step by step how to do it with little pictures. So log in, you'll see your projects. You can add a new project or edit an existing one. You add data on these screens in this way, and kind of walks through the whole process up until deploying and then viewing the dashboards and testing. So yeah, this is what it could look like if more activity on the dashboard. And then also down to viewing the results, like analyzing the results in Superset. So that's kind of just a useful resource for people learning to use it, or if you want to give a demo, you can just kind of basically follow this document outline.
But there's also documentation now added onto the main website. So if you go under resources documentation, you guys will see that there's a kind of like a list of docs now added there.
Yeah, so it's actually in both places. Yeah, thanks. That's good. So yeah, it's probably an easier way of getting to it. for getting started. And then you'll be able to see all the same content, and it has the added functionality of navigating around the table of contents. So if you're struggling with a specific piece, you can more easily find out where that is. The first part is setting up the project.
Eric, sorry, just before you do that, sorry, man, just quickly tell you really quickly what happened
Sure.
at the top there. You'll see that there's that little banner at the top now that shows you your whole ecosystem and all the technologies that you have access to when you get the SaaS version spun up. So you'll see that it's got, the workbench, and then it's got the different dashboards, including one runtime engine that you got access to from there. The rest of it, you're probably just going to access directly, and as well as the prediction server if you want to go look at the API. So that's got the notebooks and everything accessible directly from there. So it just makes it easier when you click on it, it'll then go and open up, other parts of your project. And then the stats that you see at the top there over time will be updated with different things depending on what people want to see at the top of that screen. So yes, this shows you got 13 projects, 4 feature stores, 2 predictors, and 7 dynamic configurations.
If you want to set up a new project, you can, but it's a similar process to, you would click add a project here, but basically you just kind of populate some of the details, the basic details and descriptions if you want to, and then you link data to that. So I'm not going to go through uploading and ingesting a CSV file, but if you just click on the Files tab, you can upload whatever data, and that will then be available in the system. To actually set up your recommender and configure it and tell it what to do. So here you can see the 3 recommenders Jay was talking about. The first one showing you an image, then showing you an emotion based on that image, and then a movie based on the image and emotion. So, and again, there's detail on like describing all of these fields and stuff in the documentation. But all you would do is go and give it a name and a definition. Then you link the data that you uploaded here, and you give it a place to store the actual configuration that you're setting up, or the part of the information and the configuration that you're setting up here. And then there's a little wizard that you go through to set up the next set of parameters. So asking things like, are you going to use historical data? Or do you just have sort of like a list of offers? If you do say, it expands on what sort of behavior you're expecting in terms of like successful versus unsuccessful interactions. How quickly do you want your learning to converge? How much history do you want to use when you're doing this learning? So, you want to use the last hour of data, or all the data available, or the last 100 interactions. All of that is configurable, and how do you want repeated interactions from the same person to be handled? So like, should you only look at the last interaction from each person, or all of them, or a specific number, etc. And you generate that set of parameters. The next piece is then just telling us what the columns in the data set you uploaded are representing. So, yeah.
Sorry, Eric, quickly, just for Sarah's sake, just on that engagement setting and so on, what happens is that if you think of the normal process people would go through to construct experiments themselves and having to code for all these options that you would normally need to do these tests end to end, they're all available. And we will keep on refining this kind of usability wizard style so people can configure what it is that they want to test or what they want to make dynamic. So I think that as part of that story of, why do you need it? Is that on the one end, experimentation has got a philosophy of why people want to try different options. And the obstacle, or one of the obstacles at least, that people normally experience is this technical complexity of getting it implemented and having it available in production and dealing with all of the options that you can test, because it just takes so long and it's so expensive to do. So you need this as kind of like a big part of making it work economically.
And there's also, Sarah, for you, like I'm refining some of the wording in these and writing out some examples and stuff, but I spent quite a lot of time with her explaining the different questions and things. So she should be able to help with that. So like I said, the next part is what columns did you actually include in your data that you uploaded? You can populate this list of all of the fields in your data. And then you tell us, the only kind of compulsory one is what is the name of the thing that you're wanting to actually recommend. So in this case, it's an emotion. That's the only compulsory field. Everything else is optional. Do you have a historical take-up field? In this case, we do put take-up. Do you want to track at a customer level? In this case, we're not. And do you want to include any context? In this case, we're including the image just selected. So based on this image that you choose here, we will recommend an emoji taking into account this historical information. You can include a second piece of context. In this one, we're not doing that, but in the one that's recommending a movie, we use the image and the emotion. So you can see we can just leave some of these blank if you want to. Once you've set that all up, you would generate, and that will then take you to this tab, which shows all of the options that are going to be tested in your experiment with the different segments. So for the image road 4, we're going to have anger, and if you want to see all of the images that you would test, which road, all of the emotions, sorry, that you would recommend for someone who selected the 4th road picture, you can see them here, as well as some information about like parameters in the experiment. And that is setting up the config. So once you've done that, all that you need to do is deploy it. So to do that, you go to deployment, you select the project that you set up, that's our showcase, and you would add a deployment. In this case, we'll look at the emotions one. Again, you give it a name and a description and a type, and say why you're doing it. Make it keeping track of everything that you're doing. And you also give it a version, and then say like where you're wanting to do this deployment to. So you're still in your sandbox phase, you want to do like QA testing, you're in production, or you actually just want to turn this off completely. And then you sort of document your performance expectation and what you think the complexity is, and set up your, in this case, this kind of additional functionality. The one is new knowledge, and this is just where you link that configuration that we set up. And the second is plugins, just to tell the runtime or the client pulse responder like what sort of recommender you are deploying to it. The settings tab is like available, but it should, especially in a SaaS case, it's all pre-populated with the right sort of databases to use and where the logging is done and everything. So you don't actually need to do anything there. All that you really need to do is choose platform dynamic engagement. That's how you do that's the name of the dynamic experimentation, dynamic recommender functionality. And then here you will link your configuration that you set up. And you do that just by specifying the UID that is automatically created and assigned to that configuration, which you can see here. So this, what you need to do is copy this UUID. It gets created for you. And yeah, and it will then just validate it as well and check that this is you showing recommend emotions based on images, which is what we're wanting to do here. And then you would update that and click push, and then your recommender is deployed to the environment that you've selected here. You can then go and do single calls to that recommender that you, just to check that it's working as expected. So if we go to emotions, you can set up kind of name of the call that you want to test, where you want it to call to, and we've saved a lot of a range of different tests. So you don't have to kind of constantly retype stuff, and then you can execute and you can see the result of a single call. So you can see the offer. The offer in this case is the emotion that it's recommending. This is the score. This is the most highly ranked offer. The next one is love. Scores going down, etc., etc. So you can specify how many results you want to be returned from the total ranked list. That's working as you want. You can then run sort of a bigger simulation. So instead of just doing one call, like simulate a lot of different calls to the recommender. That's the one piece we're still building up the workbench input for it. At the moment, you can just API call with the simulation parameters configured. I wonder if I still have it open.
Yeah, so in the next workbench, I think next 3 or 4 releases or so over the next week, there will be hopefully a UI created for you to set up your simulation and track your performance of your recommender or experiment directly from the workbench.
Yeah, so it's got things like how many calls do you want to do per second, etc., etc.
Eric, let me just note for everybody as well is that what it does, it basically simulates a real-time call where that call could have come from, some client having it in, the outbound client-based system or in a call center or it is. So the parameters help you to configure what its real-life situation could be so that you could just get a feel for how it will be used in the context of a real time. And then you can set the parameters to see how the calls will then be made for the acceptance rate as well.
So basically to simulate your actual production environment, one just with the number of calls, but also with kind of user behavior. And you can say, do you want people's behavior to shift over time? Do you want to just look at a specific segment, etc., etc.? And you can execute that. So this is an old config. So I have the right param saved somewhere, but this will then run a sort of a loop of people interacting with your runtime, which you can then view in your Grafana dashboard and see, like, is it converging like you would expect to? Is the learning rate what you would expect it to be?
Would you use that in a demonstration environment?
You could, if you wanted to. It would depend on what you were trying to demonstrate.
You could show behaviors changing over time?
It's not really behavior. It's like you could show that if behavior changes over time, the model adjusts because you're setting the behavior in the simulation. Like you're saying the take-up rate will be this percent and it will drift higher or lower at this rate. So like, can't really show that people's behavior changes because you're coding it.
Yeah, well,
So
I mean,
best to show that.
In real life, people aren't going to interact, 100 times in a day, but we need to show in 15 minutes to a customer. So we're basically compressing the time that behavior change. But leading on from that,
that's not. I don't think that's necessarily. I mean, like, yes, for a customer, but this is for customers. We're not simulating a customer. We're simulating the environment. So, I mean, I think you could easily have 1,000 interactions kind of every 5 minutes, depending on the volume of the customer. So it's not an unrealistic thing that you're simulating, the volumes.
Okay, then just bringing it back to our heading of the discussion real time. for me, real time, makes sense. You've got to do it, at the time that the person's interacting. But hey, why is that important in real time? And why it seems like it's simple. I mean, if you interact, you know that the person is looking at your website. Why don't you send them a message? What is the complexity of that, and why aren't other people doing it at the moment?
I'll start with the last one. Everybody that runs a successful digital campaign is doing it already. So let's make sure we understand that. So that means that any digital company that operates in San Francisco, including your music and your mobile phone or any device of the sort, tracks you in real time. So that's kind of easily answered. Those companies know the importance. The challenge is having tooling out of the box that can do the bulk of the work for you. That's when things get complicated. So that means that anything that you do that has got to do with engagement or sales driven could be real time, because you work off the basis that if you know that somebody is buying a certain service, the moment that they come to you inbound, instead of you doing it outbound, any inbound messaging should have a real-time engine connected to it. Outbound engines don't need real-time, because outbound says that I'm going to send you every 6 o'clock in the morning, spam you with a bunch of messages, where real-time says that you are in contact with a web or an app or some interaction, and on that interaction, the moment you come in, I want to know who you are and what you are most likely to do next, and on what I think you're going to do next, I want to now engage with you. So if you look at that Adelo example, says that I'm searching for a certain picture or a movie, I then get a result back, and the moment that I touch the screen, the real-time benefit is the fact that it knows my state of mind based on what I'm selecting. If it was done deliberately, it means that you would have just had to design a fixed screen or a fixed programming construct as an implementation that tells you that if people click, one, they must get two, and if they click two, they must get three. If it's dynamically designed, it means at that moment that you're in there could be a massive focus on people looking at a certain item and driving its popularity, and you want to exploit that. So all you can do is look at it like a calendar, because if the calendar is configured, we didn't get into the calendar, but if you set up a calendar, you can say that change the behavior of how I present something on a Friday or a Monday or during a sports event or whatever it is. Those are all kind of configured.
So you mentioned the tooling earlier. So if you're a company that has the resources of, say, Spotify, then you can implement real time. But if you're a medium-sized bank in South Africa, you've got 3 Java devs, a couple of API guys. Could you realistically build your own tools to implement real-time scoring?
Well, there is a saying that goes that with force of tequila, you can do almost anything. So in this case, yeah, it's probably possible. But to get all the moving parts together is just too much of a thinking process end to end. And if you think about the clients that we're working with at the moment to get this to the next level, all the moving parts to get it together is a pretty tall order. So I think that it's not impossible for people to build point-based real-time solutions. I think that there are many examples of those. So that's not the thing. The thing is to bring all of the moving parts into a platform view that can give benefit across the board is where I guess the biggest benefit lies. So that means that if you had to take the concept of a middle tier financial institution, well, maybe 3 Java devs is a concept more than a detailed fact. But if they have a technical team and you had to think of the degree of investment needed to get to an outcome that you do not know if it's going to be successful or not, because your team has never done it before. So you have to make a choice that are you going to go and employ people that know how to do this and find and pay the price for that? And once they've done it once, they probably will not need to do it again. So why would you need those skills on staff? Or you take the people who don't know, but they've read about it and they want to go implement it from the beginning, versus having a tool that can do the 80% of what you need to do or what is needed to make it work as a no-code solution. The 20% can be done by your own team as a low-code option. So they can extend it through the Python APIs or through the plugins that are Java-based for real-time and the like. So you can extend it across both when you need to. So I think that that's kind of more the story. So the story doesn't mean that you can't do this yourself. I think in any kinds of software, I mean, anybody can go build themselves another Apple iOS. Doesn't mean that you want to, or that you can with the financial resources that you have access to, or with your intellectual capability that you have access to. And I think that's the story. So the story is that give the tooling to the data scientist to service the business person who wants to get the benefit, and reduce the risk for the technologist to have it deployed. Make sure you cover the dimensions.
Just looking at one of these journeys of a customer, and how some companies are managed to sort of, as soon as a customer wakes up and they're on their banking app, and they've got third parties that are trying to sell, I don't know, coffees, that they know that through the banking app that Jane, for instance, let's call her Jane, on her way to work, she always buys coffee at Starbucks, let's use a brand name. Would real-time be useful to know that if you gave Jane an offer of 25% of her coffee on her way to work, or as she was leaving, is that what we're trying to aim for, like interacting in that space?
I can maybe go, and Eric, you can jump in. I mean, I think that there's definitely an outbound, inbound design decision that you would have to make. The outbound design decision, because you are not privy to, or if you do have tracking on the client's mobile phone and you know exactly at, say, where they're driving, you can act based on the position and the location that they're at. So an example is that Spotify did a deal with Google Earth to link the app into the maps, and so they did it with Waze and a few other companies. So that means that if you drive past a certain place, you can then recommend content that is location time based. You can take the time location concept to then decide if you're going to recommend something to somebody. But in most cases, you don't have outbound intelligence that is accessible to you. So that means that if you wanted to turn it into an inbound capability, you then have to nudge them or drive an intervention that get them to come to you for a particular purpose. So you want to test if the person is going to act on something in the morning or in the midday or in the afternoon or on a public holiday, on their way to sport, on their way to work. What is the time of the day that they're going to buy coffee? And you can run continuous tests so that you can see that this person, we've attempted to offer them something on midday or afternoon and the morning, and they respond mostly in the morning. So you can start creating that intelligence in real time. And eventually, by the time they then purchase, you will then know that they've closed the loop on your outbound message. So I definitely think that you need to think about it in that kind of looping system. You need to bring the two together. I don't know, Eric, maybe your view on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I think your bank offering you a coffee while you're on your way to work is like it's like a nice conceptual example, but I don't know that it really works in practice, especially given that all of the tightening in like location tracking and stuff. Like, how does your bank actually know that you're driving to work unless you are banking in your car while you're driving, or do they just kind of, so like I think that some of those specific examples are tough, and that's, I think, what Jay was talking about, like the inbound thing. It's like, how do you rather react in the best way when someone is interacting with you? Like if they log on to the bank and you see that you have a voucher, so like vouchers that you offer, and you see when they log on that they're in the mall, can you update those? Or because they know that they could get offers if they're in the mall, so there's an incentive for them to interact with you. Or, those sort of things I think are maybe more realistic. But also having, I think, in today's world with all of the tracking controls and stuff that everyone's putting in place, I think it needs to be like, how do you encourage people to want to interact with you at a specific point? So like they know that they could get an offer. And then when they do interact with you, how do you use your real-time capabilities to make that offer as compelling as possible so that they keep wanting to do it?
Yeah. I still think that for me, the initial case behind the balancing, checking your balance on your mobile device had such a kind of clean business reasoning behind it. Because if you think about it, kind of historically, when you go to your banking app, the bank does know that you're logging in, but you could go in 10 times and pick an item that sits 4 levels deep in your menu options, or you could go look at certain things, and they've never taken that opportunity and really acted on it. And many banks have not done that. If you think of in the telco world, when the exercise was done to understand the ratio of people checking their balances versus buying bundles or prepaid items or whatever it might be, there was a disproportionate number of people checking balances throughout a day, even if they've got a very tiny balance on their account. So that means that you can leverage that inbound message and make sure that you get to know the person, including what you're going to offer them next. So if you have to take kind of an economic value on that and you look at its lifetime value, if a person checks their balance 3 or 4 times a day and their balance on their prepaid account or their available credits sit at like say €10 or $20, whatever the amount might be that's sitting there, and you offer them something that is more than the amount that they have available in their wallet, for you to offer them, say, an OTT service. Let's say that you want to sell them a matchmaking service like Tinder, or you want to sell them a video service, or you want to sell them access to tickets to a sports game, or whatever the 300 and something odd OTT services that a company like Vodafone or any of those telco providers sell to its clients. Historically, what used to happen is that you had to wait for the client to come and buy it from you when they look at a billboard or look at some kind of social media based marketing. But if a person comes in and checks their balance, that person is engaged on that device at that moment. You pick up their account, if they have got a contract with you, what their situation is, how much money sits in their wallet, a lot about that person's kind of history of buying from you, and you in real time can then present them with an offer that's specific to them. So we definitely have seen that case on its own has created large scale, changes in how clients consume those products, because you can do it, so on point and in time, and especially if you have a customer lifetime value in mind, because what you do is you offer them based on what they have in their wallet. If their wallet is empty and the balance is nothing, then you want to sell them something to first top up their balance before you start selling them the OTT. So your product hierarchy and your options and how you expose those contextually become incredibly important, because you don't want to go sell somebody a service that is not really useful if they don't even have access to the data point. So you want to make sure that you stagger those. So that example clearly shows that if you know that there's an engagement with you. In a banking context, if you go check your balance the whole time, ideally what you should do is the moment the person goes into their account and they don't perform any useful action, that's kind of the equivalent to a balance check. And 99% of the banks around the world do nothing about that. So you really want to act on something that's quite specific. If you look at companies like, local banks in the context of like the South African, or local banks in the context of like a city where you're at, that local bank to your region should know enough about you historically to service you far better than treating you just as kind of like a mindless consumer. So the idea is that if you're in a city and your bank has done a deal with, say, Uber or some other company, and they know that you have got a lot of spending in that space, they can help to get specials for you to continue to use them so that you can get retention and other kind of capabilities built on top of that. So, and all of those are real time. Yeah. I don't know, maybe that's a way to think about it. That there's something that's been interesting in like African markets. There's a concept called a funeral policy that I know will be foreign to especially Europeans or anywhere else in the world. And that is that you acquire an insurance product from an insurer or from your telco provider, where you give €2 a month so that with the day that comes that you need to get buried, you can put up a big party. And what happens, if you think about it, is that when you sell services that have got immediate gratification, like you sell a gambling service or a video service or even a dating service, within a minute you can see or feel what the outcomes could be. But when you buy longer term insurance products, you have an entirely different social dilemma. And the dilemma is that if I remind you that there are other options, you are very likely to switch away from your previous provider. And also, if I remind you that you are paying for it and you've forgotten about it, you will be likely to stop using it. So that means that there are certain classes of engagements that, you know, might not initially seem to be well designed for real time, but could help you with real time. Because if I've sold you something and I want to retain you to make sure that you pay this thing monthly, like something like a funeral insurance policy that has got, at the moment, in some regions in Africa and in Southern Africa, an 80% churn rate. People will lapse on those continuously. So that means that how do I incentivize you or bundle it with something else that creates a broader value proposition? And that kind of context, that is absolutely ripe for experimentation, because you want to find combinations of items that create economic value for the client and a perceived economic output for the client. Where in classical context, if a recommender is just a classical single product recommender, you only keep on selling one thing until somebody buys it. You want to define a more holistic, like a bundling capability where you bring different elements together.
Yeah. I actually had a question as well, Jay, just I suppose it's to try and get my head around the scale of it. You know, if you're building this at scale and you have thousands of people interacting with your recommender, and your ultimate goal is to personalize the experience for them, right? So does that mean you have to constantly configure your recommenders based on, or is your recommender doing all that for you?
Yes. Okay. So what you do, and let's just think about a few different approaches that you can follow. There is an approach that says that prior data and an understanding of all of your prior behaviors is totally representative of how we think you're going to behave in the future. Okay, so that means that the basis of my recommender will be that I will only take the historical behaviors of people like you and build out a recommender that can recommend something to you. And that's kind of the classical approach to doing it. An interim step could be that, yes, I know that you've got some behaviors that are fairly, you know, unique, but I will only know those if I run a multi-arm bandit and I use that alongside an historically trained model based on everybody that looked like you. And you can train that model daily. In larger clients we train, you know, there's 55 million customers. That data gets aggregated on a daily basis. And you work out if the person purchased a product the last week, the last day, what their status is, and you've got 500 of those kind of different data points that tell you everything about that person's state. And then you predict what they're most likely to engage with next based on this assumption that all people buying my products behave the same. The future, where we see it going, is that isn't it ideal to have a dynamically changing capability that can, based on how you configure it, and let's say that you have a time ritual that you know that there are sports events happening at certain times, there are certain holidays that people behave differently, and you embed the understanding of the history in something that we know that is not going to move easily. I don't need a complex model to tell me that people buy Christmas presents if they are of that, in that community or of that particular, whatever that religion is. So that means that contextual setting can be set by you understanding the community. Then your behavior could then be that if you are a company that launches new products fairly often or new bundles of products, how much does a history truly tell you about their future behavior? Because what will happen is that if you think of what happens in telecommunications, all telcos know that you're always going to try and buy data and GSM products, doesn't matter what you do, because that is why you engage with them. All banks know that you're at some point going to want to transact using their product. All retail stores know at some point you're going to buy a product from that retail store. So that means there's a core, an essence of what you can get some historical data on. Where things get interesting, and that what you want to leave up for some dynamic capabilities, is the ability to experiment all the other things that your clients are going to want or your customers are going to want over time. And for you to figure all of those out manually is virtually impossible. You want an engine to calculate based on, like Eric was showing earlier, those contextual variables that can be configured from your data set. You can decide that you want to use gender and, if they like the color blue versus red. You can take all sorts of combination of contextual variables and start testing how people will behave if they are put into that context. So you can dynamically start segmenting how you're going to deal with them and decide how strongly your exploitative cycle needs to come into play.
So you could see new segments developing and seeing new trends. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the thing Eric didn't show, but we built a graph to show how your behaviors will shift over time. So if a particular option is taken up more than another option, if you think of like that emotion recommender, if people pick fear disproportionate more than happiness, you would want to understand why it happens. We're not going to tell you why, because we're not going to know why people start behaving in a certain way. What we will know is that people being presented with these options behave in that way. So you'll be able to learn dynamically rather than having to think about all of the prior situations where that has happened and then use it to predict the future. So it becomes far more time relevant.
Sarah, think of another thing with messaging, for instance. If you've got a certain type of message from your, from your bank or from your telco, and they're sending you exactly the same message every single day, you've never ever clicked on that message, would you, if the message was different, would you click on it? And the answer is, we don't know. But if you had 50 different messages, you could test which messages resonate with which customers, and you can then go down a path. Oh, are those kind of customers, that sort of segment, like certain language, they've interacted with us more, and you're engaging with them, and therefore you are building up a level of, say trust is quite a heavy word,
but knowledge.
You're building up something that is making you stand out from the crowd. And you don't need to then once a month or every second month have a sprint to discern which messages work. You put them all in there, and the engine works out. The engine has a prediction. Which message should I send out? Okay, and what time variable must I use? And experiments. So you are learning, and while you're engaging and using that information to further the information that you're then going to push out.
But you don't have to configure it all the time. So you can set a configuration in motion. But what happens, and it's kind of inconsequential, is that the parameters that you can tweak will be fairly quick to do, and you can track the differences on the real-time data.
So really, you want someone to be analyzing, right, all the time and tracking.
I can give you an example. Like in our telco client, the only way they analyze it, they look at how many items were sold in the last minute. And if the sales go down, everybody goes nuts. Because they know that if they turn the recommender off, they lose millions of dollars of revenue. While the recommender runs, it makes money. So the only thing they track, they don't care about accuracy, recall rate, prediction capability, next best. Nobody cares about any of that. That's totally irrelevant to the business person. The business person has got a dashboard, and the dashboard shows I'm presenting these offers and customers are taking them up and I'm making this revenue and the uptake rate is 10% or whatever the number is. And it's like that consistently. So the products we're selling through this capability is still creating revenue. When that number goes down, it's massive crisis mode.
And then they will change. Then they will change. They will figure out some hypothesis to change a parameter. We need to increase the percentage of our discounts, or we need to change the messaging, or these people aren't engaging in why. Change a parameter and see what happens. Oh, it's going up or it's going down. Okay, and you keep doing it until you get it up, and it happens in hours. If that long.
Yeah, so that means that the oversight, Sarah, if you think about even like the experimentation story, the concept of the backbone of experimentation is the ability to create new knowledge. If you think about it, at the heart of it, that is the pillar that it sits in from a discipline point of view. It doesn't mean that knowledge is frozen. And that's why we call it dynamic experimentation and dynamic recommender, is that historically, most of what happened in the machine learning world made an assumption that you need to freeze things on a month, day, month, week, whatever basis, and only address it again at some point in the future. Dynamic means that I'm permanently in production. So that means my recommender is permanently accessible and continuously configurable. So you can keep on tweaking it to see if the numbers are being affected and that you are getting the uplift or the sales volumes that you are expecting to get. And if you don't, you rethink your hypothesis, you change your parameter, you redo it, you start again, but it's not starting from scratch. You're busy creating new knowledge as you engage. By the time, let's take what happens with new product, new market. New product, new market means that I launch a new bank, a new telco, a new retail, whatever product in a new market, and I've never sold there before. That's called cold start. Means I might take some historical understanding of what I've done, but I want to set up a recommender where all things being equal, there are no prior history. Then what you might want to do is you might want to launch new product in existing market. So you want to take your understanding of the customer base and how they do uptake and how did they behave the previous time that the new product was presented. But then you might have new market, existing product. Then you want to understand how did the previous products that I launched behave when I exposed them to new clients? And you use some of that as input or none of it, because you could do a cold start in any of those scenarios and let it learn dynamically as to what the outcome would be. So that means that you do a radical reduction in your risk that normally would happen if a human would launch a product that is a statically designed interface and not being able to dynamically adjust or dynamically switch depending on what it is that you need to do.